Hello, and welcome to On Leading with Greatness. I'm Jim Salvucci of Guidance for Greatness. This week's installment, the insidious nonsense you know as common sense. Common sense is actually nothing more than a deposit of prejudices laid down in the mind prior to the age of 18. Lincoln Barnett, possibly paraphrasing Albert Einstein. You log into your Zoom meeting to discover your boss's pursed lips already filling the screen. She's peeved and leans right in. Why didn't you run the report past me before you sent it? You explain that the deadline was looming and that the only changes in this draft were her edits. Well, I expected you to approve the final draft before sending it. You apologize, a little too defensively. You said to make your edits and get it out immediately. Not that you wanted to review it again, so I just sent it. Whether I say so or not, she snaps, it's only common sense that I always want to see the final draft. There they are, the terminal words, common sense. The phrase is just another way of declaring, you shut up now, we're done here. It's a vestige of a supposedly bygone era when bosses simply made up rules as they went along, often after the fact. It makes an excellent conversation ender because who can argue with common sense? It's the answer to every tough why or how question that you want to evade. You can even wield common sense in response to quantifiable or demonstrable matters. Why do you say the price is too high? It's common sense. How do you know the market will increase? It's common sense. What makes you think we need to lay off workers? It's common sense. Notice that these assertions are all verifiable to some extent. The person making the assertion should be able to point to comparable prices that are lower, present evidence predicting the market's behavior, and offer metrics to show that firing workers will improve profits. Instead, all we get is common sense. Backed into a corner? Proclaim common sense, and you can all but assure that the inquiry ends right then and there. Wielding common sense is a softer version of because I said so, but just as terminal. Common sense is the euphemism of the bully and the bullshitter. We see it all the time on social media, where absurdities are presented as common sense. Everyone knows is just another way of putting it, as is good judgment, conventional wisdom, level-headedness, street smarts, being reasonable, and many people are saying. These all mean little more than, I'm right, period. And not for nothing. Most identity stereotypes, blacks are criminals, women are emotional, gays are deviants, are matters of common sense to bigots. Meanwhile, all that bigoted common sense is nonsense to non-bigots. In his 2021 book, The Life-Changing Science of Detecting Bullshit, John Petrocelli notes that common sense does not make an effective bullshit detector. As evidence, he lists tidbits of common sense wisdom that contradict one another. Haste makes waste versus time waits for no man. You're never too old to learn versus you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Look before you leap versus he who hesitates is lost. Management wisdom includes its own contradictory pairings. If you want something done right, do it yourself versus delegate, delegate, delegate. If everyone's in charge, no one's in charge versus maximize autonomy. The devil's in the details versus don't sweat the details. If all these common sense cliches have equally common sense but opposite counterparts, what use is common sense at all? Petrocelli doesn't say it outright, but the reality is clear. Common sense makes a lousy bullshit detector because common sense is itself mostly bullshit. Countering common sense. Another reason people invoke common sense is to dismiss an argument as not worth making in the first place. Well, so what? That's just common sense. In other words, why are you bothering to waste my time with this thing that is self-evident or that everybody knows? Again, such assertions are usually meant to evade difficult or losing arguments, end discussions, and provide cover for bullshit. For instance, when I was a university vice president, I regularly met with my top lieutenants along with a faculty delegate elected by his peers. The faculty sent one of their crankiest colleagues, a real type who seems to pop up on every campus. For each of our meetings, I assigned a chapter from a leadership book for discussion. The faculty delegate was welcome to join us, but he had concluded in advance that, as a bunch of administrators, we were hopeless and duplicitous blockheads out only to serve ourselves. He was having none of what we were dishing out. Instead of participating in our book discussions, he'd spend the time impatiently huffing and puffing while rolling his eyes. One day, in the middle of our exploration of Robert Sutton's excellent book, Good Boss, Bad Boss, he blurted out, "This is all just common sense, isn't it?" His question was supposed to be a showstopper. I looked at him for a few seconds before replying, "But I thought you said we have no common sense." "I guess I did," he replied with a mischievous grin. I continued, "So wouldn't common sense dictate that we should acquire some common sense?" He had to agree. For him, common sense was perfectly obvious and therefore not worth exploring. He cited common sense only to silence others, even though he clearly didn't practice it. In this instance, he had assumed that we were inherently bad administrators, but also found it contemptible that we'd want to improve as leaders. By gently challenging his self-contradiction, I subverted his assumptions and exposed the emptiness of his grumpy cynicism. Common nonsense. On the one hand, we have the belief that common sense is so universally self-evident that no one can ever argue with it. On the other hand, we have the belief that common sense is so obvious that the phrase itself can constitute a sort of insult. Whatever the case, some people just enjoy citing common sense in order to bully everyone else into clamming up. There's supposedly no arguing with it. But of course, as we have seen, there's plenty of room to argue. All of this is why leaders should never invoke common sense or allow others to invoke it as a decisive argument or persuasive conclusion. At most, common sense offers a baseline, little better than a hunch. It can get you going in the right direction, but it can never get you fully there. Treating the starting line as a conclusion is just dishonest. Challenge yourself as a leader by avoiding facile ploys like invoking common sense. Leadership hinges on developing positive relationships. It demands self-reflection and effective communication that inspires others to join the cause. This approach to leadership stands in contrast to common sense, which doesn't persuade, it coerces. Common sense is a bully's argument and not worthy of a true leader. It stifles free exchange and blunts inquiry and insight. Beware those who regularly call on it. Great leaders don't need to invoke common sense because they know the truth about it. Most common sense is little more than nonsense. How often do you cite common sense as evidence? How do you react when others cite it? Great leaders learn to eschew easy and misleading arguments such as common sense, and I can help. Unlock the great leader within. Download my free resource, the Transform to Greatness Toolkit, now at thegreatleadershiptoolkit.com. I look forward to hearing from you.